In the sprawling suburbs of Silicon Valley, in Sunnyvale, California, there is a unique Toys R Us store that is famously haunted. The legend emerged in the early 1980s, and it's about a restless spirit of a 19th century farmhand, a man supposedly named Johnny Johnson, who is said to haunt the aisles of the store built over the land where he met a tragic end. The story is a typical romantic tragedy. Johnny Johnson was a Swedish preacher and laborer on the prosperous Murphy Ranch, and he fell deeply in love with the rancher's daughter, Elizabeth. He was spurned, and he was heartbroken. He was chopping wood one day when the axe slipped, and he hit himself in the leg, and the wound was fatal. He bled to death alone, and his spirit remained tethered to the land, making its presence known through the playful but unsettling interactions within the Toys R Us store with the toys and the employees. This is the story of the haunted Toys R Us. Let's get spooky. Hey, spooky people, it's your best friend Kenny, and we are back with another spooky, disturbing story. Before we get to today's story, let's make sure that you like and share this video. Share this video every time you think about Toys R Us, for me, at least, it's every day. The legend of the haunted Toys R Us came from local rumors, celebrity television psychics, and the emergence of a new type of TV show, reality paranormal programming. The somewhat ambiguous occurrences that were reported by store employees provided raw material, which was then shaped into a narrative by a charismatic authority figure and broadcast to a national audience. It's a collection of unsettling experience shared among the store's staff and occasionally its customers. The most frequent and reported accounts involve the unexplained movement of objects. These events were characterized as playful or mischievous rather than malicious, which has been a theme that gives this haunting a unique childlike character that fits the location of a toy store. Employees and visitors describe toys seemingly flying or being thrown from shelves with no apparent cause. One of the most vivid and widely circulated anecdotes came from a former employee who was so affected by the experience that he quit on his first day of work in the early 1980s. He claimed while he was walking down the aisle, he witnessed a large box containing a baby stroller slam violently onto the floor, landing halfway between himself and a customer. Both were certain that neither had touched it, and the employee noted that it appeared to have been thrown down, not gently nudged down in the least. But this story wasn't an isolated incident. Other employees quickly regaled him with their own story, creating a folklore within the store. There are stories of bicycles rolling down the aisles unaided, and dolls that would turn their heads towards people or begin speaking despite having no batteries. Animated toys was a recurring theme. One member of the cleaning crew reported a strange event in which a teddy bear seemed to follow the crew from one aisle to the next. Kind of reminds me of Five Nights at Freddy's. It would not be seen moving, but upon entering the new aisle, the crew would find the same bear sitting at the end, seemingly waiting for them. In another account, a customer and her teenage daughter witnessed a three-tiered hanging basket begin swinging on its own while the identical baskets next to it remained perfectly still, and there was no discernible wind or drafts or any discernible vibration. These stories were passed from one employee to the next and created this powerful sense of folklore, of stories throughout the store. Beyond the movement of toys, employees would also report more personal and subtle phenomena. A common experience was hearing disembodied voices. Several employees who were later interviewed for a 1991 television special for a show called Haunted Lives, True Ghost Stories, recalled hearing their names being whispered or called when they were completely alone in a section in the store. These noises or voices were often accompanied by other sensory experiences. Reports of sudden, inexplicable cold spots or phantom breezes were common in aisles, creating a sense of horror, a sense of a presence passing by. Some of the more unsettling experiences were feelings. Tactile feelings or physical feelings. A number of female employees reported feeling as though someone was touching them, most often describing the feeling of a hand stroking or playing with their hair. There would also be the unexplained scent of flowers that was sent to occasionally manifest in certain hours. A fragrance that was entirely out of place at the Toys R Us, which smelled like, well, I think we can all remember what Toys R Us smelled like, and it didn't smell like flowers. The woman's bathroom was identified as a hotspot, a specific location where paranormal activity was most concentrated. At the Sunnyvale Toys R Us, the woman's bathroom became the epicenter of some of the most frequently reported stories. Multiple employees have described water faucets turning on and off by themselves. A former manager recounted an incident where she was alone in a stall and she heard the main bathroom door open, followed by the sink's faucet turning on and then off, only to emerge and find the room completely empty. Sounds like you have a ghost that really liked washing his hands. These anecdotes build the folklore. And there is a feedback loop here of belief and interpreting events, right? There's this gigantic retail building that's prone to a variety of mundane occurrences. Items can be precariously stacked and fall due to vibrations from the HVAC system or passing trucks. Drafts can cause lightweight objects to move. Old wiring can cause lights to flicker, and sounds can echo in strange ways. At first, these events might be dismissed. However, once the idea of the fact that there is a ghost there, maybe even jokingly, people start seeing those things as ghost activity, as paranormal activity. These oddities no longer were random, but they're filtered through a belief that there is a paranormal occurrence happening here, and it's a confirmation of the ghost presence. Expecting a ghost creates more evidence for it. It creates a self-sustaining legend. The anecdotal stories of employees and customers provided a foundation for this Sunnyvale Toys R Us haunting. But a story was constructed almost single-handedly by a psychic named Sylvia Browne. You might remember Sylvia Browne, who gave the entity a tragic backstory that resonated with classic folklore. Before Sylvia Browne got involved in the late 1970s, the ghost was known as simply Murphy's Ghost, which, made sense. The store was built on land once owned and operated by the Murphy family. According to one story, 2 employees visited the local library in 1979 and found a cryptic note about this Murphy's Ghost. This piece of evidence has never been seen by anyone else. This vague name became completely supplanted by a detailed narrative that came from Sylvia Browne's séance. She identified the spirit. His name, she claimed, was Johnny Johnson, sometimes referred to as Yanni Janssen or Johan. According to Sylvia Browne, Johnson was a Swedish immigrant who worked as a traveling preacher and occasional farmhand on the Murphy Ranch during the 1880s. Some versions of the story described him as barely literate and emotionally disturbed. The core of the ghost story was a tale of unrequited love. Johnny had fallen desperately in love with Elizabeth Murphy, the daughter of the ranch owner, Martin Murphy Jr. When she rejected his advances, he was consumed by grief and frustration. This depression, this emotional, led directly to his tragic demise. The story holds that he was furiously chopping wood, and his axe slipped and struck him in the leg, inflicting a deep gash. He was alone and unable to get help, and he bled to death in the very orchard that would one day be paved over for the Toys R Us. This is a dramatic death that just feels perfect for a haunting. The dramatic backstory of Johnny Johnson has no documented history before Sylvia Browne's investigation. She is the sole credited source for the ghost's name, nationality, profession, romantic obsession, and the specific manner of his death. She provided these details to transform a collection of spooky occurrences into a memorable and emotionally resonant story. And the narrative that she created is a composite of typical folklore archetypes. The character of Johnny Johnson embodies the tragic lover, a figure whose intense passion leads to his doom and binds his spirit to the physical world. He's also a lonely immigrant, a stranger in a strange land, which adds a layer of isolation. His spirit is not evil or demonic, but it's a restless soul, a sympathetic character who likely did not even realize he was dead. All of this taken together makes the story more emotional, makes it seem more rational rather than just straight horror. The story is a classic tragedy, complete with a protagonist, a motivation, and a fatal flaw. This is what keeps the story being passed on. A story about a heartbroken man named Johnny is far more compelling and easier to remember and retell than a vague story about Murphy's ghost or random toys just falling off shelves. By creating this hero, Sylvia Browne provided the legend with a human face and a relatable emotional core, and it's ensured its survival long after the initial events were forgotten. The local legend of the haunted Sunnyvale Toy Store was catapulted into national audiences through a partnership between Sylvia Browne and a popular television show. The ABC show That's Incredible cemented the story in American pop culture and provided evidence that would be debated for decades. That's Incredible aired from 1980 to 1984, and it was a rating success that captured the interests of that era. It was hosted by John Davidson, Fran Tarkenton, and Kathy Lee Crosby. The show was a variety program that presented a mixture of daring and often dangerous stunts, human interest stories, and the explorations of paranormal phenomena. It was a successor to Leonard Nimoy's In Search Of. It was produced by the same creator, Alan Landsberg, but with a more sensationalist and less investigative tone. The show's segments on the paranormal were presented earnestly, often with cheesy and dramatic reenactments that prioritized entertainment value over accuracy. The segment on the Sunnyvale Toys R Us aired around 1981, and it was a textbook example of the show's approach. It combined dramatic recreations of toys flying off shelves, including a Godzilla doll, with interviews and a cinematic on-site investigation. The centerpiece of the episode was a séance conducted within the store after hours, led by Sylvia Browne and attended by a group of employees. The event was staged as a genuine attempt to communicate with the dead, filmed for a national audience. A crucial piece of evidence from the That's Incredible segment was a photograph taken during the séance. The production team brought in photographer Bill Tidwell, who had reportedly been working with Browne on a previous investigation at the store in 1978. And he brought 2 cameras, one shooting standard high-speed film and another one shooting an infrared. And this is technology that's typically used by paranormal investigators under the belief that it can capture ghosts and other paranormal activity invisible to the naked eye. During the seance, Browne claimed to be in communication with the spirit of Johnny Johnson, and the photographer captured images with both cameras. When the film was developed, the standard photograph showed only the group of people sitting in a circle in a dimly lit aisle. The infrared photograph revealed something more. In the background, a faint, blurry silhouette of what appeared to be a man could be seen leaning against a shelving unit. According to the show and the participants, no one was standing in that position during the séance. The image was powerful. In this pre-digital era, a photograph presented on a television program with a news-like format carried an immense aura of authenticity. The show's host presented the image as definitive proof, and they explicitly told their millions of viewers, keep in mind, kids, these photographs are real and could not have possibly been faked. The show and its hosts were authorities, and combining that with the scientific framing of comparing standard and infrared film, it shut down any critical analysis from the mass audience. This ambiguous, shadowy figure became the face of Johnny Johnson, and it became a visual anchor for the entire story. It transformed a collection of subjective anecdotes into a seemingly documented event with a tangible artifact that believers could point to as indisputable proof. And the story kept on in the media. In 1991, it was given a higher budget, more frightening treatment in a CBS special called Haunted Lives True Ghost Stories. This version was narrated by Leonard Nimoy and was directed by horror director Tobe Hooper, who was the creator of the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. This wave of media exposure further entrenched the legend in the public imagination and has ensured its longevity. These television programs, broadcast to a nationwide audience, made this haunting seem legitimate. However, the story of Johnny Johnson on the Murphy Ranch doesn't stand up to scrutiny when you look at historical records. If you look at the verifiable history of the Murphy family and their Bayview Ranch in Sunnyvale, it reveals a story that's dramatic, but notably lacks the dramatic story of Johnny Johnson. Martin Murphy was a genuine pioneer and a foundational figure in Santa Clara County, and his family were part of the Stevens Townsend Murphy Party, the first wagon trained to successfully bring wagons over the Sierra Nevada mountains into California in 1844, 2 years before the Donner Party attempted a similar route. In 1950, Murphy purchased a vast tract of land from Rancho Pastoria de las Borregas and established a thriving wheat farm and a cattle ranch he named Bayview. His home became a local landmark. Murphy commissioned a 20-room, prefabricated New England-style house built in Maine, dismantled, and shipped to California. It was reassembled on his property in 1850, becoming the first major wood frame house in the region and a major center for social, political, and religious gatherings. The Murphy family continuously occupied the home for over a century until the property was sold to the city of Sunnyvale in 1953. The historic house, after a fire and termite damage, was ultimately destroyed in 1961, and a replica of this house stands in the Sunnyvale Heritage Park Museum. Sylvia Browne's story completely collapses when you compare the historical record. Elizabeth Murphy could not have rejected Johnny Johnson in 1881 because she died in 1875. This fact invalidates the entire motivation for the haunting as presented by Sylvia Browne and popularized by the media. Interestingly, the history of the Murphy Ranch had genuine tragedy, where there was a pool of lots of ghostly candidates that could have been chose from if someone did the research. James Murphy, who was Martin and Mary Murphy's oldest son, died of consumption or tuberculosis inside the Bayview house. William Tafe, who was Elizabeth's husband, died at a young age, leaving her a widow. Fred Hoffman, who was the brother-in-law of one of Elizabeth's sons, was working a pump inside a well on the farm. The well was adjacent to a leaking gas tank. He became overwhelmed by fumes and asphyxiated. Then his brother-in-law, Martin Tafe, went down to retrieve the body. He lit a candle to see it, which caused an explosion that blew him out of the well. Martin was badly burned but survived. All these stories could have provided a backdrop or a truth to these hauntings if someone had done the research. But the story of the unrequited love of Johnny Johnson is a better story, and especially a better story if it's going to be presented to a national audience. Self-proclaimed psychic Sylvia Browne is the single source for the entire story behind the haunting of the Sunnyvale Toys R Us. Looking at Sylvia Browne's track record, this type of narrative creation around hauntings seemed to be part of her MO. Sylvia Browne was one of the most famous and controversial psychics in modern American history. She rose to prominence through regular appearances on television talk shows like The Montel Williams Show and Larry King Live, where she would perform psychic readings for her audiences and commented on high-profile news stories. She wrote a lot of books. She hosted her own radio show, and she established her own Christian church, the Society of Novus Spiritus. She had a large following, and people believed she was a genuine conduit to the spiritual world, that she was capable of communicating with the dead and her spirit guide, who she called Francine. Despite her massive popularity and claims of maintaining an accuracy rate of over 85%, however you calculate that accuracy rate, I have no idea. But independent investigations and her predictions have revealed that a lot of her career was BS. Her pronunciations would often cause significant pain to the families involved. For example, there's the Amanda Berry case. In 2004, on the Montel Williams show, Browne told Luana Miller, who was the mother of a kidnapping victim, Amanda Berry, that her daughter was dead. She stated, "She's not alive, honey," and implied her body was in water. Miller would die in 2006, reportedly of heart failure, and she had spent the last years of her life believing her daughter had been murdered. In 2013, Amanda Berry was found alive, having been held captive for over a decade. In 1999, Browne claimed that 6-year-old Opal Jo Jennings, who had been abducted, was not dead but had been taken to Japan and forced into white slavery. Later that year, a local man was convicted of her murder, and her remains were found. An autopsy revealed that she had died hours after her abduction. Sylvia Browne has a documented history of fabricating evidence, specific, detailed, and false stories. Sylvia Browne's involvement in the Sunnyvale Toys R Us case was the active process of story creation, a method that she employed throughout her career. Whenever she was confronted with what could be a paranormal situation, her approach was always to create a highly specific, emotionally charged cinematic story. And the story of Johnny Johnson fits this pattern perfectly. She gave names, dates, a clear plot, and an emotional hook. This is the same thing that she did in the Jennings case, where she invented a story about Japan, and the Berry case, where she created a story about a body in water. So you can look at her story of the Sunnyvale haunting and see it as a prototype for the method she would use later in her career. Her work would later be described by critics as incredibly offensive and that she preyed on the vulnerable. As I'm sure most of you know, in 2018, Toys R Us around the country closed, much to all of our sadness. After the closure of the Sunnyvale Toys R Us, the building did not remain empty for long. The location was periodically occupied by a spirit Halloween during the Autumn Store, which is, as many of you know, the greatest store of all time. It's ironic that this type of spooky store would inhabit this spooky location, and it would keep the legend alive in the local consciousness. This area would get a more permanent tenant in 2021, where an REI store, which is a recreation and sporting goods retailer, would relocate to the Sunnyvale Toys R Us space. And people wondered, would the playful ghost of the 19th century farmhand trade his interest in toys for kayaks and camping gear? And incredibly, the legend has persisted into the REI era, though most of the phenomenon have been reportedly more subdued than the dramatic accounts from the Toys R Us. The stories have shifted from toys flying off shelves to more subtle quirks of a modern commercial building. Before the REI officially opened, an employee noted some weirdness with the lights and an incident where a paper towel dispenser in the bathroom began operating on its own with no one nearby, though I'm sure we've all seen that happen. Other REI employees would mention that the store's walkie-talkies would sometimes turn on randomly and that the automatic sensor at the front door seemed to have a mind of its own. Another employee discussed feeling the distinct sensation of someone walking past them behind the front registers when no one was there, and witnessing a door in the back room swing open as if someone had passed through it. Obviously, these accounts are less dramatic than a stroller box being thrown to the floor, but it shows that this legend lives on. The building's reputation primes new people in the building to interpret any unexplained glitch or odd sensation as potential evidence of a resident ghost. The story is deeply tied to this site, and it now shapes the perceptions of those who are there. And in a savvy business move, the legend's been embraced by REI. Rather than ignoring the building's paranormal past, REI has leaned into the story, recognizing its value as a unique piece of local color and a powerful marketing hook. For the grand opening of the Sunnyvale store in October 2021, REI's marketing team made the haunting a featured element of grand opening celebration. The company's own Camp Monsters podcast had produced an episode specifically about the legend, titled The Sunnyvale Haunting, and members of the podcast team were presented at the opening event to share the story with customers. This marketing transformed a potentially strange footnote into a public relations move. It showed that they were aware of the local history and culture, generated significant media interest, and gave the store an immediate identity that set it apart from other big box retailers in the area. The ghost of Johnny Johnson haunting the Toys R Us completed his journey into a piece of corporate folklore. The story of the haunted Toys R Us in Sunnyvale, California is a case study in modern myths and modern hauntings. Ambiguous experiments were taken, a story was created around them, it was amplified by the media and fundamental aspects of human psychology and the want to believe. And this legend has continued on, even after the closure of Toys R Us, and even in the face of its complete debunking. It shows that its power and the want to believe in these types of ghosts are so appealing to us as humans. The ghost of Johnny Johnson may not actually physically roam the aisles of this store, but it will continue to haunt the landscape of modern American hauntings for a long time. Make sure that you're subscribed to this channel, The Spooky Lawyer. Make sure that you like and share this video. Follow me on Twitter, Blue Sky, and TikTok. My username is The Spooky Lawyer. If there is a spooky or disturbing story you'd like me to cover, leave a comment and tell me about it. Or if you like the video, leave a comment and tell me about it. Or if you're feeling shy, send me an email. My email address is thespookylawyer@gmail.com. If you would like to support the channel, you can make a donation. There is a link in the description to buy me a coffee, so buy me a coffee. Or you can become a member of the channel. For the $1.99 tier, you can get access to exclusive content, including exclusive videos. And you can get access to my videos before they are published. I appreciate you considering this. You also support me by continuing to watch my videos, clicking like, and sharing them. And I really do appreciate that you watch my videos. And please stay spooky.